newly elected senator from Annapolis, Sarah Elfreth, representing much of the Severn River watershed and our 50,000 households. Being the youngest senator in the state history, getting her way. When I counted on the website, the Senate website, I think she was listed on 87 bills that she's sponsoring in some form, lead or co-lead. 2 of those that she's in the lead are major environmental bills. 3 are related to the forest, where she's a co-sponsor, and I think she's going to describe the status of those in the outlook. Her volume of work is incredible. Sarah.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm sure the folks in the room are familiar with the legislative session. It's 90 days long. We have 19 days until we adjourn, sign, and die. And on Monday was crossover day, which meant we did double sessions all last week, and on Monday to make sure that we passed enough bills so they can cross over to the opposite chamber, and the House did the same thing, cross over to the Senate. So we've gotten a lot accomplished in the last week alone. I am co-sponsoring, I didn't even count myself, but quite a few bills. I'm happy to report that the 9 bills that I am the primary sponsor on, 8 of them have passed already in the Senate and are moving their way through the House. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the bills, and Dylan Baylor is my legislative aide in the back. He was able to get this information for you. Before I talk about the bills, though, I do want to share just a little bit about my role as the senator. I serve in the Budget and Taxation Committee, so not directly without the Environmental Committee, but it's the committee where literally all the money comes through, so I do get to touch some environmental stuff on that committee. But I also have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Joint Committee on Critical Areas, which we're going to do a lot of work in the interim. The House chair is Delegate Dina Stein from Baltimore County. So he and I will work together over the interim to figure out what we need to do. I'd love to have a couple meetings that are open to the public so that you all can come in and talk to us about what you think we should be doing, and then travel around the state to see what's working well and what's not working well in our various critical areas. And then I'm so thrilled that I've been appointed by the Senate President to serve as one of 2 senators on the Chesapeake Bay Commission. So working with Pennsylvania and Virginia to solve the issues related to the Bay. So my first meeting will be in May, so I'm happy to come back after that meeting and tell you all about that experience. But everybody in the room knows that we can't do it all ourselves in Maryland. So much of the Bay is impacted by our surrounding states, so we really need to work as a partnership and as a team. So I'm so thrilled to be on that commission. But to the main event, the issues that are so important to the Severn, I want to touch on 6 bills for you tonight, 7 bills. The first is the Clean Energy Jobs Act. I want to start with that because we passed it this morning in the Senate, which is very exciting. I believe the vote was 33 to 13, so that is so strong that should the bill pass the House and should the governor veto it, which is what he did last time a few years back when the General Assembly passed it, we have the votes to override that veto. It passed the Senate today, but it's stuck in the House committee, so that's a little bit frustrating. But the bill does a couple of things. It advances our goals of renewable energy. Right now we're on track to reach 30%. This bill would have us reach 50% by 2030. The Senate bill, and interestingly enough, this doesn't happen too often, but on the floor of the Senate yesterday, we actually added an amendment on to take out trash incineration as qualifying for the renewable portfolio standards. So truly a clean energy jobs bill, which is very exciting. And then it studies how we're going to get to 100% renewable energy. The study would come back to us in a couple of years. So it's still a challenge. We have to get it through the House committee. It's been stalled twice now. They've tried to vote it out of committee. They've tried to kill it, frankly, in committee, and it's stalled. So it's still alive. But I want to assure this group that we have 70-something new members of the General Assembly, including myself. So often, big pieces of legislation don't necessarily make it through in the first year. So I assure you that if we cannot get it done this year, we're going to work on it over the interim. We're going to come back stronger, and we will get it passed in this term. It just might not happen this year. So I just want to couch the success of that bill. But I'm so thrilled my Senate colleagues realize how important that bill is, particularly when it comes to addressing climate change head on. I stood up on the Senate floor this morning, and I think Dylan can tell me, I don't think I've ever spoken on a bill that I wasn't floor leading on or sponsoring. It's not really my style, but I wanted to express on behalf of the district how important it is. I live near the city dock in Annapolis, and I can't tell you how many times I've walked home and seen the entire thing closed off, and it's so frustrating because it's one of those challenges, climate change, that we almost feel like we don't have enough tools to actually address it, that there's really no solution. It's too big of a problem to address. And whenever I think about that, whenever I see the flooding, I say to myself, this is why I ran for the Senate, and it's my job to find whatever solution we have at our fingertips. And I truly believe that this is a solution, this is something we can control, and I'm very happy that it passed. It's also, frankly, an economic issue. The two fastest growing jobs are wind turbine installation and solar panel installation. So this is about green jobs, it's about growing our economy, and it's about not losing our competitive advantage to states like New Jersey and Massachusetts that are frankly taking this more seriously than we are at this point. So we can grow our economy and address climate change head on. So I'm very thrilled that we passed that bill today. I want to touch on the 3 forest conservation bills because I know this group feels passionately about that. There's 2 major oyster bills that we passed last week that are very exciting. And then we have an environmental violations reporting bill that is small but mighty that I'm very happy about. So I'll start with the forest conservation bills. I'm co-sponsoring all 3 of them. All 3 of them have passed the Senate. The task force bill, and you have it on your sheet right here. We've tried to strengthen the Forest Conservation Act for a number of years now. It was first passed in 1991 or 2. And it was great when it first passed, but always intended to be strengthened later on. Has not been strengthened since that time. So this is really, the argument against strengthening that bill over the last few years is that we don't have the data that suggests that we can actually do it. So the task force bill simply tries to tackle the science and the study aspect of it. So that passed both chambers. I'm happy to explain how the legislative process works, but that's a good sign. Hopefully the House bill will pass the Senate bill will pass the House, go to the governor for his signature. The fee in lieu of bill on forest conservation is very important. Everybody here knows that developers like to pay the fee in lieu of, that money is not necessarily always used to then plant the forests that have been taken down. So this strengthens that and allows us to actually plant what has been taken down. And that passed both the Senate and the House. And then the no net loss bill redefines forest in the state code. And that bill passed the Senate. The House version has not been voted on, but it did pass the Senate in time for crossover. Dylan the backfill, or no? I believe it passed by Monday, so it's been sent to the House, so they can consider the Senate version of the bill at least. So that's very exciting. Yes?
Does the fee in lieu bill include a requirement that the fee cover the cost of acquiring land to plant the trees? That's been a major problem in the past, that the fees have been way too low.
Yeah. That's an excellent question, and I don't have the answer off the top of my head. I'm a co-sponsor. If it was my bill, I would probably know the answer to it, but I'm just a co-sponsor. I'm just helping move it along. But we can get back to you on that.
Sarah, I can answer.
Oh, thank you.
That bill requires the jurisdiction that receives the money fee in lieu to do whatever mitigation what the developer is paying in the fee in lieu to avoid mitigation. So the jurisdiction has to do that mitigation. So if mitigation would require purchasing land because the jurisdiction doesn't have land, then yes, we'd have to cover that. It's basically a kind of an open-ended, if you pay this fee in lieu to avoid mitigation to a jurisdiction, the jurisdiction has to do that appropriate mitigation. So it's a good thing because that hasn't been a requirement in the past. And the fee in lieus have been too low to really do it.
It's a step in the right direction, but it's still
Well, the jurisdiction sets the fee.
I think.
It's the county and city sets the fee.
Yeah.
Right.
They charge it up and up.
I can tell you that the fact that all 3 of these are moving is really exciting, again, for a new session, a new legislature. And I apologize if I don't know the details of every bill. There are 2,500 bills that have been introduced, so I know this much about all of them. So those are the 3 Forest Conservation Acts bills that are, again, all backed by Chesapeake Bay Foundation and local environmental groups. It's all very exciting. My environmental violations bill I can't tell you how many doors I knocked on in the campaign and how many people in our community feel like we may have great environmental protection laws on the books, but they're not being enforced. And so that's kind of all been anecdotal, and I know everybody in this room can shake their heads and agree with that, but we don't necessarily have the data to back that up. Now, we have a lot of great reports on it, but we don't have a great understanding statewide of how many complaints there have been on different development sites when it comes to sediment erosion or critical area law violation. We don't have an idea of how often those have been inspected, how often those inspections have led to some type of mitigation or a fee or a fine, on whether those have been resolved or not. So this is a really simple bill. We can FOIA those things. I've worked very closely with Jesse Iliff from Arundel Rivers Association. He was the one who brought this bill up. He's been able to FOIA Anne Arundel County on all those things, but not every county is so willing to give up their information. So this bill is very simple. It just mandates that Maryland Department of Environment reports once a year on all of the delegated counties that have the authority to do this. And I didn't want it just to come to my office as your senator and gather dust. We want to make sure we put it online so anybody can access it. Now, we had the brilliant idea of how about not just a spreadsheet, but also an interactive map where you can go on and click and see the history of everything. MDE came back to us and said to do that would cost $500,000 for whatever reason. So we decided to amend that part out of it so we didn't have a fiscal note. And we're gonna, if this bill passes, we'll just work with some intrepid college students who know how to do this for no amount of money, so we can get that data up online. But our theory here is that we need to prove that what we know to be true anecdotally, which is that we are not enforcing, we are not inspecting, those inspections have not led to mitigation or haven't been resolved. And we can come back in a few years and say, well, we need to strengthen our environmental laws and strengthen those inspection periods. So it's one of the, a first step bill in a longer issue. The bill passed the House last year but died in the Senate committee. So I've been working with Delegate Steve Lafferty from Baltimore County. So we got it through the Senate committee. It was a little dramatic. It took them 3 tries, 3 different votes to get it out of committee, but we got it, and it passed the Senate floor on Monday in time for crossover. And the House bill passed to the House, so we're in pretty good shape on that bill. Yes, ma'am, you had a question.
I was a question, I was just going to say, when you're looking to see how much we haven't done, look at the number of inspectors any county has. It's so minimal, it's so elected. You can't inspect, you can't catch it when it is the wrong thing.
And to me, this is a bipartisan, nonpartisan issue. It's about good government. We need to have faith that our government is doing what our taxpayer dollars are there to do.
Law, fine, if you can't enforce it,
Right.
what's the point?
Exactly.
Professor Ray tracked over 20 violations over 15 years. It turns out that the county never prosecutes and sends them up to the Attorney General's environmental group. They would only prosecute against a landowner if there was an eyewitness who would testify he took part in the removal of trees.
We have a lot of work to do, and this is the first step in strengthening those environmental laws. So I'm excited and think those are going to pass. Yes, sir.
I live in your district, and that part I understand, but does your district also take in what was previously the Crystal Spring project?
It does. So District 30, thank you for asking, is the city of Annapolis, really the whole Annapolis Neck Peninsula, and then all of South County, all the way down to Friendship.
Thank you.
Yep. I have 3 precincts on the Broadneck Peninsula, so I represent some folks in the Broadneck, but not everybody in the Broadneck. And then the 2 oyster bills, which I'm so excited about. The Speaker of the House, Mike Bush, has a bill that passed both the Senate and the House, designating 5 of the 51 oyster sanctuaries, the largest sanctuaries, and you have a map on the back of your sheets, as putting those in a permanent moratorium from harvesting. We spent probably 3 days in the Senate, at least, debating this issue, but it was able to pass, so those will be protected. And then I have a companion bill that our attempt was really to take the politics out of how we fish oysters. So Dylan and I were down in meeting with some folks from Deal, and they came up, they mentioned how they were just at a lecture at CERC, at the Smithsonian, on a pilot project in the Little Choptank River called Oyster Futures that used a grant from the National Science Foundation. And they took 2 years. They had a board of 60% watermen, 40% advocates. They brought in professional facilitators from Florida who had done this in the Gulf of Mexico fisheries. And over the course of 2 years, they met, they were able to build trust, these two groups that are so distrustful of each other as it is, the watermen and the advocates and scientists. And over 2 years, they came up with a consensus-based fisheries management plan for the Little Chop Tank. That 75% of the group had to agree on each of the 19 recommendations to move forward. So it was a great model, and I called the scientists from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science the next day, and I said, how do we do this in Herring Bay, just in my little corner of the world in this district? And she said, I think we can do it for the whole Chesapeake Bay. So we got to work the next day, and the result is what we call the process bill, because it's kind of boring, but it completely revolutionizes the way that we determine our fisheries management plan for oysters. So folks in the room know that whoever is in charge of, the governor's office is in charge of the Department of Natural Resources, is in charge of fisheries management, and that can swing one way or another depending on the party affiliation. Under Governor O'Malley, the Oyster Advisory Commission was heavily scientist and advocate. Under Governor Hogan, that swung to being very pro-waterman. There's really no balance under any administration. So our goal here was to put the future of oysters in the hands of the people it impacts the most. So we put into code a new Oyster Advisory Commission that's 60% watermen, 40% advocates, funds it, so we bring in those facilitators, and over the next 2 years, they negotiate with each other. For the Seinfeld friends in the room, I like to call it an airing of the grievances with each other. And they can build that trust and have those open lines of communication and build a fisheries management plan for oysters that works for everybody. And again, having to achieve that 75% consensus over those 2 years. So we brought in watermen, and Dylan and I were yelled at quite a bit over the last couple months. We worked across the aisle. This was truly a bipartisan bill from the start. Senator Steve Hershey and Senator Addie Eckert from the Eastern Shore and I worked hand in hand on this bill. And frankly, improved the bill from where it was by everybody won a little bit, everybody lost a little bit. I've only been a senator for 63 days or so, but I can tell you I think that's exactly where legislation and policy needs to be, is bringing all the stakeholders to the table. People might be upset at the end of the day, but compromise is in the middle ground is what's best for everybody. So it turned out, again, after a couple of days of debate on the floor, the bill passed the Senate 45-2. And the 2 Republicans who voted against it were, ironically, the ones that I worked closest with on this bill, who stood up and said that if it were just on the merits of the legislation, they would vote for it, but they have, they represent people who are unhappy with the bill and they have to vote for their district, which I completely respect. If you've all hated a piece of legislation, even if I agreed with it, I would tend to vote with my district more often than not. So I was told that this is the board, the how we vote. They said it was the greenest board they've ever seen in an oyster bill in over a decade. So we brought everybody together. The bill passed the Senate last week. It passed the House on Saturday. There's a couple of differences in between. We're working them out right now. We're sending them to the governor's office probably on Monday. So it's very exciting. We're hoping it's not going to be vetoed, but if it is, I do think that we have the votes to override that veto. So those are, in a nutshell, the big environmental bills that I thought y'all might be interested in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I answer any questions about those or any other pieces of legislation?
First bill, any chance in the Senate?
Yes, this is the major pesticide bill. I actually don't think it, Dylan, I can never pronounce the word. I can't pronounce the word. Chlorpyrifos. Dylan staffed that committee last year, so we heard all the debate. It has not passed the Senate.
No.
I don't think it passed the House.
It did.
It did pass the House.
Yeah.
It has not gotten out of committee in the Senate yet.
Okay.
They did a whip count yesterday. I was asked where I stood on it, and I was voted for it when it gets to the floor. So I think they want to know where it's going to land on the floor before they get it out of committee.
Okay.
You don't want to lose. So this is my first session as a senator, but it's my 12th session working in advocacy. And I can tell you, if a bill can't get out of committee, it often means it's not ready and it's going to fail on the floor. So it can be frustrating that bills can take multiple years. But just like the oyster bill, most bills take 3 or 4 years. So we're doing well. But often If it can't get out of committee, it means it's not going to pass on the floor. So it's not ready yet if that's happening. But it got out of the House, so hopefully we can get it to the floor of the Senate. Yes?
What's your office phone number?
I actually don't know off the top of my head. Dylan, what's our office phone number?
410-841-3578.
Sorry, I just have it on speed dial.
All right, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Give her up.